Hello and welcome to the JSA studio. I am your host, as always, Nathan, and today we are going to continue our roster breakdown for the Michigan Wolverines with the wide receivers. Let's go ahead and jump right into it and discuss the starters. In the slot, I have Roman Wilson. At the X wide receiver position, I have Cornelius Johnson. And at the Z, I have Darius Clemens. So, unlike a lot of other positions in this list, I'm most unsure about this group. I think Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson are locked in as starters, though Roman Wilson, I'm not so sure where he will start. It could be in the slot, like I'm predicting. I think at the next level in the NFL, he'll likely be a slot and Z hybrid, potentially a return man as well. So I don't know what his specific role is going to be in the offense quite yet. So I have him in the slot right here. I have Cornelius Johnson at the X. That's his natural position. Although I do think he can play all three roles. I have him starting at the X. And Clemens, I think, is going to be someone who's just too talented to keep off the field. So you're going to put him at the Z. So what do all these letters and terms mean, and what is the role that these players are going to be doing within the offense? The slot position for Roman Wilson over there on the left, that is the player that typically lines between either a tight end or a tackle and an outside wide receiver. The slot typically is intermediate to short routes ran over the middle of the field or occasionally an outbreaking route. These are usually quicker, smaller guys that can make you miss those sort of positions, but occasionally they do things like a slot fade for deep shots. The slot wide receiver will also line up on the line or off the line as well. The X wide receiver traditionally is a bigger bodied receiver who specializes in jump balls and physical, maybe not necessarily a great route runner, wins with body placement and positioning, and that is Cornelius Johnson. I think, even though I do think Cornelius Johnson is an excellent route runner and one of the most underrated players on this roster, he is probably going to be the X wide receiver this year. The X wide receiver almost always lines up on the line as well. That's basically what it means. The roles can be different for a slot wide receiver in X or Z in a different scheme, but the X usually comes with those types of big body, power forwards, as they say. But really all that means is he is the one lining up on the line of scrimmage, and the Z is the opposite of that. The Z will most of the time line up off the line of scrimmage because you don't want him to get pressed. You want him, Z is usually the super fast guy, which is why Roman Wilson will fill that role very effectively at either for the Michigan Wolverines this year or in the NFL. But Clemens has that deep shot in him. He's got that big play ability in him. So let's go ahead and keep him off the line of scrimmage and get him some free releases. So for the X wide receiver, Cornelius Johnson, let's talk about him for a minute. Positives, he's a big body. I think he's listed at 6'2", like 205. He's a good route runner, has consistent hands. Negatives, he's not very productive, which is more a symptom of the system rather than him, in my opinion. Not great in contested catch situations, which is a hallmark of the X wide receiver position, although that may be because of he hasn't had the opportunities to show to me that he is a very good contested catch wide receiver. The last thing is that he doesn't really have an elite trait, which is why, even though I think he's going to play in the NFL for a decade plus, he's not going to get drafted very high. I think he's likely a late third or fourth round pick, but he's someone who's going to be a third wide receiver in the NFL. For you Lions fans, I think Josh Reynolds is a good comp. Josh Reynolds can play really all three positions. I think Cornelius Johnson can do the same. I also think he has special teams upside for the NFL. This is a sort of best case scenario for him, stats wise, would be 70 receptions, 1,000 yards, 8-ish touchdowns, and a worst case would be 32 receptions, 400 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I think his production specifically for him is going to align more with how productive the actual passing game is and how often we actually pass the ball. Last year, it was almost 2-1 in terms of runs to pass. We ran almost twice as much as we threw. And this year, I think it's probably going to be closer to like 55-45. So we could see more targets for people and more opportunities for wide receivers to make plays and do things. So 70 catches, 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns would be a very, very good year for him. Moving on to the slot, Roman Wilson. I have him starting in the slot. He very well could be the Z. Maybe Tyler Morris takes over for the slot. I do think Michigan does have a pretty good two deep at every position. But outside of that, I don't think they have the depth of the wide receiving core like they did last year. Now, last year, they didn't really have any injuries to the wide receiver room. But this year, that could, if we get 2 or 3 guys down, that could become a problem. Roman Wilson positives. He's fast as all hell. He's a great route runner, underrated athlete. He's sneaky athletic. He's tough and has solid hands. And my point for both of them is a couple of years ago, he broke his wrist 1 week. I think he missed the next week and then came back. Usually a broken wrist is like a 6 to 8 week injury. He was back in 2 weeks and making catches, tough catches too. Like one was a bullet pass to the back of the end zone that he caught in his hands. Good player all around. Negatives. This is from more of a scouting perspective. Slight frame. It doesn't really have the frame to get up to like a 190 without probably losing some of his speed and explosiveness. Doesn't have any contested catch upside. That's just a size issue. And obviously his worst thing, which makes him undraftable in my mind, is the fact that he's a vlogger. No, not really. Although that does raise character concerns, as we all know about vloggers and what they end up doing with their lives. As far as the best case and a worst case, I think a best case scenario, you're looking at 50 catches, 900 yards, 8 touchdowns. In a worst case, you're looking at 25 catches, 400 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I think the worst case would maybe be he either gets hurt or Tyler Morris is just too good, or maybe Samaj Morgan or somebody else is just too good, and they're going to steal reps from him in the slot, and then Clemens solidifies the Z position, so maybe he's kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit. That could happen to him. I do think he is a draftable wide receiver prospect. It would not surprise me if he got drafted in the 5th, 6th, 7th round next year, but it also wouldn't surprise me if he was a non-priority undrafted free agent and a camp cut. But I do think he has that explosiveness to him that you're looking for those Z and slot receivers. He's got great agility as well, and the potential to play very, very well this season and also play in the NFL for a long time. Does also, when we're talking about the NFL, he does also have upside as a returner for kicks and punts. Z wide receiver Darius Clemens. Positives. He's a big-time athlete. Gets deep quick, and he has first-round X wide receiver traits, which is 6'2", 6'3", 205 to 220 pounds, probably a high 4.4 guy, so good enough speed, not necessarily great, but good enough speed. He's also got the frame to put on potentially even more weight than he's already put on. He has put on some weight from freshman to, I believe this will be redshirt freshman year this year. His biggest negatives is that we don't really know anything about him. He made that one big play in the spring game last year, didn't do anything this past year, didn't really get on the field this past season as well, so we don't really know if he's going to be good. Like you watch him and you watch him run routes during the spring game and you're like, oh, that guy's a dude. Like, he's got it. Whatever it is, he has it. But we don't know yet until he actually gets on the field and I can get some live reps of him going against different talent. As far as a best case and a worst case, best case probably 60 catches, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. Worst case, 30 receptions, 500 yards, and 3 touchdowns. I do really think he's going to be very, very good. It's too early to talk about the NFL with him, but I think he's going to be a very, very productive receiver for the Michigan Wolverines this year. Realistically, you're probably looking at 4 or 5 touchdowns, maybe 6, and 650 to 750 yards, because he's probably going to be the third option this year. But he could break out and just be that absolute dude. As far as stat predictions, because this is the last one, they're all kind of limited to me, in my mind, to likely be single-digit touchdowns and around 1,000 yards. I don't really think we're going to see a wide receiver get to, you know, the school record of like 1,300 yards this year. I don't think anybody's going to get anywhere near Desmond Howard's single season touchdown record, maybe ever. But I think you could see 3 or 4 wide receivers get up above the 700-yard mark with 3 to 7 touchdowns each. Other wide receivers to watch: Tyler Morris, Peyton O'Leary, Frederick Moore, and Samaj Morgan. Of these ones, I think Tyler Morris is going to be a staple in the rotation. Over here on the right, I think Peyton O'Leary is somebody who will get a lot of snaps during the blowouts, garbage time. I don't really like that term because if you're throwing in young guys, it's not garbage. They're gaining experience, so I don't really like that term all that much. But he'll, I think, be in the game during that time. Peyton O'Leary dominated Amorion Walker, who we'll talk about when we get to the DBs, which will be the last video in this series. But he absolutely dominated Amorion Walker. He looked like, I think Jim Harbaugh after the game said that he's got a little bit of Cooper Kupp in him, but that's just because he's the white wide receiver. That's it in the NFL. So take that with a grain of salt. He's not the athlete that Cooper Kupp is, but, you know, it's whatever. Frederick Moore and Samaj Morgan, I don't know a whole lot about each of them other than Samaj Morgan is very fast and a very good athlete. Frederick Moore, I think, has also been turning heads during OTAs, so those are potentially players who could crack the rotation this year. And that is all that I have for you today. Go ahead and like if you like the video, subscribe if you want to keep seeing content like this. If you disagreed with me at any point in this video, or if you thought something was a good take, go ahead and let me know down in the comment section below. But let's go ahead and keep it civil. After all, what do I know? I'm just some asshole. And I'll see you next time.